All right. Good evening, everybody. It's great to be back with you all. I think this is our third week as we are working through specifically the book of Ecclesiastes and the topic of deconstructing atheism. And I hope that I am actually live. I think I am, though. Again, my interface doesn't give me like a red light or anything to tell me that it's actually working. And I do not see that the stream is caught up, but it appears that it has. Good evening, everybody. Let me mute myself there just to make sure. But great to be back. It appears that it is working. As usual, we'll wait just a few minutes for people to come in. I do encourage you, if this has been helpful, please feel free to share this, that we might get other people to jump in and to join with us. We would love for the word to go forth more and more, especially just my personal conviction. I love the book of Ecclesiastes. I'm thankful that it is so relevant to the way people think today, and I think the author is bold, and he engages the sort of skepticism we might find in the world around us. Good to see you, Brian. What's up, Austin? Good to have you here with us. We will get going in a few minutes, and as we're waiting, I'll say go Patriots. It was great to see them win, and I hope that they will win this weekend. Also go Indiana. That was nice as a Georgia fan. It was nice to see. I don't mean that I was rejoicing in Carson's failures, but the interception that essentially sealed the deal for Indiana was very similar to the things that he did at UGA, and so I think most of us Georgia fans went, yeah, that's what happens. So also congratulations to Andrew Jones. I don't know if any of you guys are baseball fans. Andrew Jones has been was an incredible player for the Braves. He started, I think, in 1996, played for, I don't know, maybe 15, 18 years, not entirely for the Braves, but he was an awesome player I watched growing up. And today, just tonight, he got elected to the Hall of Fame, and so the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame. So that was good to see. I was glad to see that. Again, we're waiting just a few minutes just to give people a chance to log on. If this study has been helpful for you, would love for you to just share it, that we might pass it along to others. And as you can see by the title here tonight, our passage is going to be giving us at least 5 reasons to hate life, and from a position of skepticism. In other words, the goal is not that you would hate life, but if you are going to reject God, then the right conclusion from his 5 observations is that life should be something we really despise and hate. But we'll wait a few more minutes. If you do not hear from me for a few days, if you're following me on Instagram or TikTok this weekend, it is because our city is going to be hit by an ice storm or snowstorm, which for us means like 1 to 2 inches, and that's enough to shut us down. We are not prepared for ice or snow really of any degree. So if I just kind of jump off of all communications, because I'm probably trying to save my battery and stay warm for a few days, which I'm sure it'll be gone in no time at all, if it even does snow. But I think the bigger concern for our city is all the trees that are already leaning because of Hurricane Helene, and as well as the weight on the limbs that'll tear down power. The limbs will break, tear down power lines, and leave us out of power for a while. Yeah, Courtney, y'all are getting some too. What's up, Brandon? Great to have you guys with us this evening. Awesome, Hannah. Glad you joined us. Normally I tell people, hey, put your questions in all caps. I don't have that there tonight. I'm just messing around with different things. But if you have a question, if it's related to the study, or if it's related to something else about Scripture, about the Christian life, feel free to ask it, but I will have a better chance of seeing it if you put it in all caps or use some sort of emoji to get my attention. Yes, that's right. It is catastrophic. They are describing our weather event coming up, the 1 to 2 inches of snow, as a catastrophic ice storm, because that's all it takes to shut Augusta down. And so we'll see how it goes. Same here. Oh, you're in Texas. Yeah, you guys are expecting some as well. May the Lord keep you safe and warm. And I'm excited to at least see some snow. My boys keep telling me they just want to pound me in the face with a snowball. So I pray they get a chance to attempt to do that, and I'll be ready for them. Thank you, Rhonda. Thank you for sharing that. And we'll go ahead and get rolling. So let me just remind you guys, and I'd say this not to be obnoxious, not to be pious or any of those things, but I am very convinced that what the Christian needs, what makes much of Jesus, what shows that you're truly Christ's disciples, is the way you participate in a local church. And I emphasize this every week because I just want to be clear, what I'm doing here is not a church. This is what we might call a parachurch ministry. So I'm thankful for you guys, always encouraged by you, but I'm not a pastor to you, and we are not members of some online church. A church by nature is incarnational, meaning it's lives that are rubbing up against one another. People who know you well are able to observe your life, to press against one another like iron sharpening iron. Like just imagine 2 pieces of iron on a digital screen trying to sharpen them. It doesn't work. You've got to rub the metals together. And so the local church is meant to be how we make Jesus look glorious and great. So do not use this as a replacement for participation in the local church. My hope as we do this is that Christ's word might go forth, that the word might press more and more against the consciences, not only of his people, but of unbelievers, because I think Romans 10:17, faith comes by hearing the word of Christ. And so this is just an attempt to participate in the breadth of the word, it going further and further, though I never desire this to become some sort of online church. Just catching up on comments. Don't know if it was allowed. Yeah, well, I hope they'll enjoy it. Brian, I am a part of the Universal Church. Absolutely. So I'm not at all knocking the idea of the invisible church throughout time and space. But what I am saying is, in terms of the sort of commands that Jesus gives. You think of Hebrews 13, for example, where the author says to submit to your leaders. They're responsible for your soul. As a pastor, I'm not responsible for every soul, every Christian on the earth. I'm responsible to those that gather in my local church. And so I make that disclaimer just to say the sort of care necessary between a church and their pastors, or Christians to one another, it can't be exhausted by what we have in the online community. So I say that just to say this isn't Christ's vision for a local church. I think this can be a fruit of it, an extension of it, but there's much more. There's a much more robust vision for what a Christian does with a church than just online community is all I mean. So we'll move on. Ecclesiastes. Again, we're in the book of Ecclesiastes. Let me remind you that there are 2 views throughout the book. Some people would say, the preacher is just crazy and he's just kind of waffling back and forth between these contradicting perspectives. I think the end of the book makes it clear Israel understood this is a book of wisdom. That's why the third party, the third person perspective, who tells us who the preacher is at the very end, tells us that these are wise sayings, like nails that are driven into a stud. And so we can hang our life upon them, because he believes the book is filled with wisdom. And so I think the best explanation for Hebrews is not that the author was crazy and contradicting himself, but that he gives us 2 perspectives. The first, this all is vanity under the sun perspective, is his attempt to summarize how he tried to live without God. He lived without reference to his Creator. He lived by only what he could see and observe. So that's why throughout the book you see words like I saw, I perceived, all these things. He's just living based on what he can see without reference to God. He's trying to start with his own self as the point of reference in his reasoning. And so what he's doing throughout the book is he's telling you about this perspective and he's deconstructing it. He's saying, I lived this way, and what I found was all is vanity. That's perspective number one. And that's where we've been the last 3 weeks. Today, the third week, we're going to continue in that perspective. However, the second perspective begins to emerge in our passage tonight. And this is what some have called carpe diem statements, like seize today, make the most of the time that you have, because there is a starting point. There is a way to live life in a way that's meaningful. It just doesn't start with you. It actually starts with God and what he has revealed. And so what the book is doing is it's not contradicting himself. He's working between two perspectives. He's tearing down the structure of idolatry of self and reasoning, and he's replacing it with God and his word as the starting point, and showing you as a human being how to truly live a meaningful life. So that's where we are this evening. And today, as you can see by the title here, we are looking at 5 reasons to hate life. Let me make sure I can get this up. All right, so you can see that. That's not what we want. Yeah, we want this. So I'm putting the scriptures on screen for you. And what I want you to see, even at the outset, the reason I've titled this... oh, shoot, I can't reach my little thing anymore. Okay. I think you guys can see scripture now on your screen. Just trying to make sure I have that there for you. And here's what I want you to see. I want you to see in verse 17, verse 18, and verse 15. Because what I'm trying to explain real quickly is, why am I titling this 5 Reasons to Hate Life? Well, because our passage this evening, the author wants to show you how his secular approach to life brought him to the conclusion that he hates it. And that's really where we're going this evening. So he says in verse 17, you see it right there? So I hated life, because what is done under the sun was grievous to me. So this perspective that he's giving is he's going to show us why we should hate life, why we should grieve. You see it again in verse 18. I hated all my toil, which I toiled under the sun. You can see it one more time down in verse 20. It's a different word, but he says, I turned about and gave my heart up to despair. Okay, so what the author is saying this evening through this passage, what he's going to test is life as something he hates. It's something he despises. And so he's giving us this reason, these 5 reasons this evening. If God does not exist, he's saying, here's 5 reasons we ought to hate life, we ought to despair. Welcome, Bobby. It's good to have you with us. So we're starting this evening at chapter 2, verse 12. Just a reminder, chapter 1 was essentially the preacher's thesis that the wiser you tried to be, the more pain and suffering you'd experience. Because if you're truly paying attention to all of the data, humanity cannot save the world. And so a life of wisdom only brings deeper despair. And so he moves to chapter 2 and says, okay, well, if a life of wisdom isn't going to help me, let's try a life of pleasure, right? If we're going to turn from God, rationalism isn't going to save us, but maybe hedonism will. And so we looked at chapter 2 last week, verses 1 to 11. And we also looked at quotes from like Jim Carrey, from Tom Brady, and all these guys who had it all. And they've recognized that even building a financial empire, having every pleasure that you could ever dream of, it's never enough, was his point. And so today we're going to move in verse 12. We're going to look further where he's going to continue his experiments. He's going to show us a further experiment to help us see that if you want to live life without God, you're still going to be miserable in the end if you're consistent. But maybe to get us started, let's look at Steven Pinker. As a reminder, I'm often using Pinker as kind of the atheist that I'm engaging with here. And let me see, try to get it up there for you guys. Nope, not what I meant to do. All right. I've got Pinker here from his book, Enlightenment Now. And the reason I have Pinker is he is a Harvard philosopher, psychologist, and he's an atheist. And he wrote a book, Enlightenment Now, I think I've got it right here, several years ago. It was New York Times bestseller. And so I engage with this fairly regularly throughout when I wrote a book on Ecclesiastes. And I want you to hear Pinker, because this is sort of what we're criticizing. This is sort of what we are responding to. But Pinker, in the introduction to his book, tells the story of a time a student asked him, essentially, what is the meaning of life? And so what you have on your screen now, this is just a quote in my book that is from Pinker's book, Enlightenment Now. And here he is, as an atheist, he's telling you, here is the meaning of life. He's not necessarily asserting that it is an objective meaning, but from his subjective perspective, he's saying, as an atheist, under the sun, God doesn't exist, here's why life is worth living. And he puts this forward. He says, in the very act of asking that question, why should I live? What is the meaning of life? You are seeking reasons for your convictions. Now, again, as anyone, we should be going, well, that doesn't matter. Like that doesn't make this a noble pursuit. He says, and so you are committed to reason as the means to discover and justify what is important to you. Which begs the question, why does that matter? And there are so many reasons to live, he says. As a sentient being, you have the potential to flourish. Never mind the fact that every bit of flourishing you accomplish is going to result in your death and the generations after. You can refine your faculty of reason itself by learning and debating. You can seek explanations of the natural world through science and insight into the human condition through the arts and humanities. You can make the most of your capacity for pleasure and satisfaction, which allowed your ancestors to thrive and thereby allowed you to exist. You can appreciate the beauty and richness of the natural and cultural world. As the heir to billions of years of life perpetuating itself, you can perpetuate life in return. Never mind the fact that it's just going to be a life that dies, but, we'll save that for later. You've been endowed with a sense of sympathy, the ability to like, love, respect, help, and show kindness. And you can enjoy the gift of mutual benevolence with friends, family, and colleagues. And because reason tells you that none of this is particular to you, you have the responsibility to provide to others what you expect for yourself. You can foster the welfare of other sentient beings by enhancing life, health, knowledge, freedom, abundance, safety, beauty, and peace. History shows that when we sympathize with others and apply our ingenuity to improve the human condition, we can progress in doing so, and you can help to continue that progress. So I point that out not because I disagree with all of those things as valuable. I think it's good to learn, to grow, to be sympathetic, to progress, and all of these things. But this is really a by faith position. I mean, progress assumes that we are designed for a particular end and that we are somehow making headway towards that. From an atheist, this is shocking language. Like, if we're to be consistent, I think Nietzsche got it right when he said atheists don't understand the ramifications of our atheism. We've unhitched the earth from the sun, and we no longer get to enjoy the heat and warmth of these sorts of values and things like that. And so, but he puts this before you and says, this is the meaning of life. Essentially, he makes 3 points. You can reason, and since you can reason, you can flourish. And since you can flourish, you have an obligation to help future generations. That's Pinker. That's his reasons for living, he says, why we should live. But while I appreciate his perspective, and I do think he's a thinker, I think Scripture, specifically Ecclesiastes, would say he's not being thoughtful enough. Perhaps he's not being honest enough. What I love about the book of Ecclesiastes is that he says that you and I have not uncovered enough of the data. And so what the preacher is willing to do is he's willing to look under every rock, every conclusion, and say what the skeptic of today often won't. Life is absurd, and you have no reason to think it valuable at all. And for that reason, I think the preacher of Ecclesiastes is much bolder and much more skeptical than today's atheist. And let me show you what I mean. Well, let's start working through his book, through our passage. I'm going to start by looking at verses 12 to 14. 12 to 14. And remember, if you have comments or questions, feel free to answer or to put them in the chat. put them in all caps to draw my attention to them, or use a goofy emoji, something that draws my attention. But Ecclesiastes chapter 2, here we are, starting verse 12. The preacher's moving away from a life of hedonism. It didn't work. So now he puts 3 options on the table. He sits back and he says, all right, here's my perspectives. I could pursue a life of wisdom. I could pursue a life of madness. I could pursue a life of folly. These are the 3 starting Pokemon of life, right? You got Charmander, you got Squirtle, and you got Bulbasaur. And that's what he's doing. He's setting all 3 of them in front of him, and he says, all right, I'm going to go on this journey. What should I take with me? Do I want wisdom? Do I want madness? Do I want folly? And I just hope someone appreciates the Pokemon reference. But he's got these 3 right in front of him. And then he makes this rhetorical question. For what can the man do who comes after the king? And if you'll remember, when we first went through chapter 1, I pointed out the significance of his identity as king is that no one has greater access to the cultures and kingdoms of the world than he, right? Even trying to live life wisely is vanity. Yeah, absolutely. And the significance of his identity as king is that he can go further than your common man can. He can test what your common man cannot. He can have the pleasure and access to the things that the common man cannot. And that's his point here. He's going to put wisdom, madness, folly up on the table together. He's going to compare them. And his point is, what man can come after me and has access to more than I do, right? For what can the man who comes after the king, what can he do, right? He can't go further than the king. So this is going to be a thorough test. He can only do what's already been done. So this is to keep you from thinking, oh, you know what, well, if I had done this test, I'd come to a different conclusion. He's saying, you need to stop being so arrogant and thinking you have all the access and all the pleasures and all the ideas that the world has ever known. As king, he's saying, I've actually got far more access, far more privilege, far more resources. You need to recognize you can reproduce this test if you want, but what's going to happen? You're not going to do anything new. You can only do what's already been done. And here's his conclusion in verses 13 to 14. Then I saw that there is more gain in wisdom than in folly, as there is more gain in light than in darkness. The wise person has his eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And so the point that he's making here is he's actually agreeing with Pinker for a moment. He's saying that the skeptic is right. He says, there is more gain in light than in darkness. And so in one sense, we should be able to affirm, yes, a life of rationality is a better foundation than a life of building your life on myth. Now, don't be naive, right? He's giving 2 illustrations here. There's more gain in light than in darkness, right? So 99% of the time, if you're going to walk through a room in your house in the middle of the night, you have a better chance of making it with the light on than the light off, right? So it is with life. He looks at wisdom, madness, and folly, and he brings himself to the conclusion there actually is more gain. There is more gain to be wise than a fool. And he says, he gives another illustration. The wise person is like someone who has eyes in their head. In other words, if you can test this out. Run across your room with your eyes open, then go back, do it again, run across the room with your eyes closed. The person whose eyes are open, they're going to make it. The person whose eyes are closed, there's a good chance something's going to get hurt. And he says it's the same thing with wisdom. Rationality is more dependable, it's more reliable than folly and foolishness. And I had a friend years ago, he was playing tag. We were at an event, and he ran to this big auditorium. He was playing tag with some kids. We were youth counselors. And he was playing tag with some of the kids, and he ran through the auditorium. The lights were off. He ran right into the wall. He had glasses on, shattered, cut his eye, really bad. But what the preacher's getting at here is, if you reject reason and rationality, you're walking in darkness. And the life built on reason is actually better than one built on folly and darkness. But he's going to put an asterisk here, because I think what he's saying is, you know what, Pinker, I'll go with you on that. I think you got something going for you. For a moment, if we look at most of the data, it looks like a life of intelligence and rationality are far more profitable than one of folly. But then look at what he says. Not right there. He says, and yet, so he continues the experiment. He wants to take the experiment further than the skeptic normally will. And he says, okay, it's better to be wise than a fool. We can see this. Yet, when he looks at all the data, he perceives that the same event happens to all of them. The same event happens to all of them. So when he thinks about the wise man, he thinks about the foolish man, thinks about the madman. It says, okay, clearly to be wise is going to be out in front. He's going to win that race every time. But there is an event that levels the playing field. There is a point when all the data bottlenecks, and it turns out that the fool, the madman, and the wise are not different at all. A totally level playing field. And what he's saying here is death relativizes any gain. It relativizes any advantage. You want to know 5 reasons to hate life? The first reason is death renders all progress futile. And that's where he's going, right? Yet I perceived that the same event happens to them all. Then I said in my heart, what happens to the fool will happen to me also. Why then have I been so very wise? And I said in my heart that this is also vanity. There's a reason we're not asking Stephen Hawking his opinion on the world, because his death has put him in the ground where all the people who had IQs lower than him are already buried as well. Meaning, you go to the graveyard and you look around and you're going to find a variety of intelligences there. You're going to find a variety of faith perspectives there. You're going to find a variety of financial accomplishments in life, all accomplishments, period. But what you're going to see is the same event happened to every single one of them. So he says, what happens to the fool if I live a life of reason and rationality? I'm going to experience the exact same end. In other words, why have I given myself to wisdom as if it matters? This is all vanity. Remember, vanity is this enigma, this frustration. It's like catching net or air in a net. It's like trying to catch the wind. And so the point that he's making is, you can say to yourself, I'm going to Richard Dawkins my way through life. I'm going to Sam Harris my way through life. I'm going to choose the rational path, the intelligible path. And the point that he's making is, you're not going to get out ahead of anyone. It's not advantageous. You're going to be buried right next to those religious fools. You're going to be buried alongside all the madmen and women who thought differently than you. Any advantage that you think you have, death says, no, you're going to lose every time. It's not an advantage. And so any life built upon thinking that life is more valuable, he says, it's all vanity. Why do you think that your wisdom and your rationality give you an advantage? They don't. So what the preacher's doing is he's saying, look at all the data. Don't just select the data for your temporal 80 years. Look at it all and consider death. Death renders anything you think is an advantage useless. So he moves from death as being the first reason we should hate life. And he moves to the second. Now you might say, okay, well, it's true. I'm going to die. I've accepted that. I'm a bold person. I'm staring death in the face. But what I want to do is I want to leave a legacy. I want my life to be meaningful, not by living forever, but because for the 80 years that I'm here, I'm going to do something worth remembering, right? And so that's where he goes next in verses 16 to 17. He's going to address that next. It says, for, he's going to explain further why it's vanity. Of the wise as of the fool, there is no enduring remembrance. See that in the days to come, all will have been long forgotten. So the point he's saying is, you can soothe yourself and think that you're going to leave a legacy. You're going to be forgotten. That's just think for a moment. How many people from the 1800s do you think we remember right now? Just collectively across the globe, how many people from the 1800s do you think we remember? It's like 0.000000001%. I mean, like 99.99 repeating are totally forgotten. And so if you soothe yourself, say, well, I know I'm going to die, but I want to leave a legacy. He says, in the days to come, all there refers back to both the wise and the fool. You're both going to be forgotten. You really need to deal with this. Don't soothe yourself by thinking, I'm going to make a contribution that people remember. You're not. You're going to be forgotten. And thus you shouldn't use that. This is the secularist myth that I can create some sort of temporal meaning, some sort of temporal value to spend my 80 years. But the preacher's saying, wake up. Death is going to render your life with no advantage. And don't try to soothe your conscience by thinking, oh, well, you'll live for something meaningful. It's going to be forgotten. We say, that's okay. I don't need it to be remembered. I don't need to be remembered. I'm more noble than that. I'm living for the collective society. I don't need to live forever. I don't need to leave a legacy. Well, all I need to do is contribute to a better world for the generations after me. Well, that's not new. Solomon tried that, which gets to his next point, starting verse 18. He says, I hated all my toil, in which I toil under the sun, seeing first that he must leave it to the man who will come after him, and who knows whether he will be wise or a fool. Yet he will be master of all for which I toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. This also is vanity. So I turned about and gave my heart up to despair over all the toil of my labors under the sun. Because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. Well, this also is vanity and a great evil. What has a man from all the toil and... let me stop there. That's the next section. I don't want to go into that yet. We're going to leave that there. So let's look at 18 to 21 for a moment. Let me look at it. Let's see. Wouldn't what be idolatry? I think there is idolatry in our suppression of the truth about God, such that we try to create our own meaning, reasons to live for the 80 years that we're under the sun. I do think is a form of idolatry, for sure. Oh, thinking you live a morally better life than the next. Yes, I'm not sure how you mean that exactly. I think there are ways we can make judgments and see who has lived a more moral life. It's not the same thing as saying a sinless life. We are all guilty before God, but we can say there are people who are more moral than others. That isn't necessarily idolatry, if that's what you mean. But okay, so far what we've looked at is reason number one to hate life: death. If you think that you are building something meaningful, death renders all advantages pointless. If you think that you are a rational person and that you're going to end up ahead of those who are silly believers in myth, you're going to be buried right next to them, making no progress. Secondly, you might soothe yourself by saying, well, I want to be remembered. I don't have to live forever. Well, you're going to be forgotten. Thirdly, you say, this is where we are now in the third reason. You say, okay, fine, I just want to build a better world. But you need to pay attention to what happens to the generations that come after us. What he says here is he's going to give a few reasons. The reason you can't soothe yourself by saying, okay, I just need to make a world better for the next generation, he gives us two reasons to hate this here. Number one, he says, I hated all my toil in which I toil under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who will come after me. Notice down here, he uses the word master. He says, yet he will be master of all for which I toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. So the first point that he's making, or really the point that I'm making from this here, is he says you're actually a slave to the next generation, like whether you like it or not. The staggering of the generations, all of the effort that you put into life is actually, he says, think of it like a slave and a master. The next generation is the master, and the generations before them are their slaves. You're building a world not for you. And so for that reason, he despairs all of his toil. All the wisdom that he acquires, it doesn't benefit him. It instead makes him a slave to the next generation. And you might say, well, that's a good thing, right? We want to improve the next generations. We want to build a better world. But here's the problem, he says. Who knows, verse 19, whether he will be wise or a fool? Whether he is going to be wise or a fool. One of the things I've experienced growing up in the late 90s in America is that we've had a lot of veterans in my childhood upbringing, and one of the things that they are known for is, and they gave their lives. You think of World War I, World War II, the conflicts that they went through to build a better world. And often they're looking down upon the youth, frustrated that we don't recognize the significance of their sacrifice. And the point that he's making here, what Ecclesiastes is making here, is that's what happens. Verse 19. Who knows whether the next generation will be wise or a fool? In other words, what the world that you build for them, they often aren't going to appreciate. They don't care. That's what deconstruction is. It's one generation rebelling against the values of another. You can read Dr. Gordon Neufeld. He talks about this in his book, Hold On to Your Kids, that this sort of, we are seeing new sociologies emerge where in past generations, like especially in third world countries, tribal countries, the values of the older generations are passed down vertically to the next generation. But as societies, what modern man has done is we've begun to see a reversal of values. The younger generations no longer look to the older generations to receive culture and values. The younger generations are now actually putting out their own culture, their own values. They're rejecting the values of the generation above. That's why if you want to get into a good market, you want to aim at children, because the children are determining the new values. Youth, adolescents. We don't care about the generations that came before us, because everything that they did with their wisdom, we consider folly. We don't want anything to do with them anymore. And so you can soothe yourself all day long and say, I'm going to give my life to wisdom to build a better world for the next generation. But you have no guarantee. In fact, the odds are nowadays that they are not going to care about what you built. Look, I think one of the things seculars haven't realized is they had momentum towards the late 20th century, early 21st century. But what's going to happen is the next generation is going to grow up and they're going to say, and it's really happening already, like people are already tired of secularism. People are now turning from naturalism and they're looking to more spiritual worldviews again, because they don't want the wisdom of the generation that came before us. And so he says, I can't soothe myself from all of my toil and all of my wisdom, because the next generation will likely be fools with what I've built. So he says, okay, he goes on a little further here. I turned about and I gave my heart up to despair over all the toil of my labors under the sun. Because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. So he says, I've chosen wisdom. I'm not going to be a fool. I'm not going to give myself to folly. Yeah, Brian, I think you're right. I think that's how we rationalize it. We say, hey, we've got more information. Sorry, I'll step back for a moment. We're going back to the generational disparities, how the younger generations cast off the old. And Brian makes a good point. That's because they have access to far more information than we did, so they see us as obsolete. I do think people tend to think that way. I don't think that comes from wisdom. That comes from, I think Lewis said it well, chronological snobbery. The modern man believes that something is virtuous by virtue of it being novel, and something is a vice by virtue of it being old. And Lewis said it well, something along the lines of, novelty is no virtue, antiquity is no vice. New information is not the same thing as being wiser. And that's something every generation has to learn. But I agree with you, Brian. Yeah, Bobby, it is kind of depressing. And that's the point. This is supposed to discourage us. There's good news at the end, I promise. And I'm not trying to be a salesman. It's just the way the text works. The good news comes at the end of this passage. So, reason number one, the reason we should hate life, death renders all progress moot. Secondly, you're not going to leave a legacy, you're going to be forgotten. Thirdly, if you try to build a better world, the next generation will probably foolishly squander any contribution that you make. They don't care. And so you can't soothe yourself with that sort of comfort. But he says it again here in verse 21. Sometimes a person who's toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. I'm going to use the Titan submersible one more time as an illustration. The day the Titan, Stockton Rush and Ocean Gate, the day that went missing, we didn't know, at least it wasn't released to the public, that it had been compressed and basically exploded underwater. So for several days we were waiting to try to discover them, see if we could pull them up out of the water, thinking that they were still alive. Well, one of those days, one of the sons of one of the millionaires on board was seen at a Blink-182 concert. And there were articles, I think it was Cardi B who made a comment about it, essentially talking about him being greedy and selfish, not at all concerned about his father, because he knew that if his father died, he was going to inherit all of this wealth. And that's what the preacher's saying happens. Like, it's really strange in a secular culture for people to get mad about that. Like, man, if God doesn't exist, like, that's just the way the world works. Sometimes a person who's toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who didn't toil for it. Yeah, you may get rich, and you may die early and lose it all, and you don't get to enjoy any of it. Like, if you want to be a skeptic, you need to recognize that's just the way it is, and you don't get to tell people, who ought to feel bad about this or about that. Mentioned this book in class, and people said it was depressing, but I said it's depressing because you're holding on to the very things it talks. Yes, Brian, I think you're right. The reason the book is depressing is if you cling to this first perspective that he is deconstructing. But maybe one more illustration. I knew a guy, his name was Glenn. I was playing soccer growing up. He was one of my coaches. He had a son on our team. And I remember my dad saying one time that he wished he had chosen not chosen his path, but he looked up to Glenn's choices in life because Glenn had made some investments early on, and he retired like late 30s because he had just hit it big. But then he died a couple years later. He had some disease, ended up turning into cancer, and he died. And all the wealth that he has gone. My dad's still around 30-something years later. And, you just see how limited our perspectives are, and all the things we try to do as secularists to comfort ourselves apart from God. It's just vanity. So that's reason number 3. So we'll go on to number 4, verse 22. You might say, well, okay, fine. It doesn't matter to me that I'm going to die. It doesn't matter to me that that I'm going to be forgotten. It doesn't matter to me that the next generation could possibly squander my contributions. What matters to me is that I love what I do, right? Somebody who just says, you think like a teacher, right? I don't do it for the money. I do it because I care about the kids, right? So you might say, okay, for these 80 years, it's worth living because I'm going to give myself to something that I love. And the preacher's point is, at the end of the day, however, our work really doesn't benefit us. It actually is just one more means of suffering. It says in verse 22. What has a man from all the toiling and striving of heart with which he toils beneath the sun? Okay, again, that question is him going like, let's try to look at these advantages. What are the advantages from working, from a life of work? What's the advantage, he says? He says, all his days are full of sorrow, and his work is a vexation. Even in the night, his heart does not rest. This is also vanity. So what he's saying here is work does not guarantee a life of joy. I think many people would amend that. You're already dreading. I appreciate you being up late. At least this is late for me because I know you have work tomorrow, and work isn't necessarily a source of joy for everyone. But then he goes on, he says, work is a vexation. Vexation is just another word for misery. And the fact is that a lot of our jobs actually are hard on our bodies, whether it's the physical labor that causes our body to wear down faster, or whether it's just the emotional pressure, high performance industry, just the stress, or even the sedentary lifestyle of many office workers. Work in the end is just one more source of misery. In fact, despite going to work, making money, building up your savings, it's often the case that at night the worker's heart does not rest. People have insomnia. They're filled with anxiety about things. They don't know what's coming next. Their job hasn't provided them the source of comfort and the ability to even sleep well at night. So you can stop thinking about death. You can stop thinking about the next generation. You can think about how you want to spend your 80 years here, but so often the way you spend your 80 years is just filled with misery, anxiety. It's just pressure. It's awful. If you love what you do and it's outside of God, then it's an idol, correct? You're asking. I'd have to probably get some clarification there. It's good for man to work, and it's good to love what we do. That doesn't necessarily mean, if I'm an unbeliever, that thing in and of itself is my idol. It could become my idol. It could be that I've tried to hide from God in giving myself a sense of purpose through my work. And in that sense, that would be a form of idolatry. But I wouldn't say that necessarily all instances of unbelievers working is necessarily an idol, if that makes sense. So then he's going to go, here's the fifth reason. I'm going to give you the fifth reason to hate life. I'm going to skip the middle section here for just a moment. I'm going to get to the fifth reason, which is right here in verse 26. And that's not helpful because it's kind of helpful. Starting at the bright, well, that's pink. This is more of a pinkish red. But here's the fifth reason. Fifth reason we should hate life. The person or the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner, he has given the business of gathering and collecting only to give to one who pleases God. Now, here's his point here, the fifth reason. If you reject God, everything that you are living for, namely, trying to avoid your Creator, hoping to hold on to the stuff that you're building or creating, trying to find meaning in all those things, what he's saying here is every ounce of your life is actually gathering up for those with whom God is pleased. You see that there? To the one who pleases God, pleases him, God gives wisdom, knowledge, and joy. But to the sinner, he gives the business of gathering and collecting only to give to one who pleases God. And what the preacher is saying is, at the end of life, when all is under judgment, everything that you do in rebellion to God actually serves to benefit the people who have looked to God in faith. So the fifth reason you should hate life apart from God is that you cannot escape judgment. And your life is actually contributing to the very Creator and his people with whom you are trying to turn away from. So that's the fifth reason. So I'm going to pause for a minute and try to answer some of these comments. Let's see. If we work and take joy in the Lord, then it's a pleasure. Yes. 1 Corinthians 10, verse 31, whether you eat or drink, do all to the glory of God. And so knowing the Lord should allow us to do everything that God has called us to for the glory of God. I think Brother Lawrence had a quote. I remember one time it stuck out to me, but he was talking about making omelets, and he was like, I just love flipping little omelets in a pan for God. And such a menial task, he loved making omelets, and he found joy in the Lord doing it. So whatever we do, let us do all to the glory of God. You're absolutely right, Brian. Living a faith-filled life is one of the best ways to live, I'm guessing, even when I don't know the answers. That's where he's going to go, and I'll explain why in just a moment. Let's see, he said, like we all know, God works everything out for good in his will, but this is mind-blowing. Yeah, it's remarkable. I think, so one of the things the preacher does that today's skeptic cannot is the skeptic believes that the answer starts with humanity being able to solve all problems, right? Not perfectly and not right now, but that one day man will uncover the answer. And the preacher is saying, your skepticism is very biased. It's biased towards you because you seem to think that human beings have within themselves the seeds of their own improvement, as Pinker says. And the preacher's saying, if we're really honest, if we really were looking at all the data, humanity is never going to be able to solve and save ourselves. We don't have all the answers, and we never will. And so life cannot be built upon man having the answers. And that's why life apart from God is frustrating. And so what the preacher's doing now tonight is he's giving us these 5 reasons which are immensely depressing. 5 reasons to hate life. Number 1, death will make all your rational progress moot. Secondly, if you try to comfort yourself by leaving a legacy, well, you need to know you're going to be forgotten. Thirdly, let me make sure I got it. You are a slave to the next generation who will likely squander anything that you build. Fourthly, the work that you think is so meaningful now is actually part of what's killing you. It's just producing more anxiety. It's slowly destroying you. And fifthly, anything you attempt to build apart from God will in fact not serve you in the end. It will be used to benefit those with whom God is pleased. And so the preacher tells us all this so that you would look at the work of your hands and go, what am I doing? Like, I'm just wasting my life. This is all vanity. This is enigmatic. There's no point. And the idea is you need to do this before you get to your deathbed. You don't need to wait. You need to face this now. Because here comes then what we call the preacher's carpe diem statements, his seize the day statements. And this is where it is right here, the first one starting verse 24. He's going to use the word better here. In the Hebrew, this is the word tov. It's the word for good that you find in Genesis 1. That everything God made is good. It's good. It's tov. And so what the preacher's doing is he's actually saying the starting point for mankind. Like he wants you to live a meaningful life. You cannot live a meaningful life cut off from God. Instead, you need to start with what God has revealed. And so the preacher's looking at Genesis. And here he says, verse 24, here's how you were made to live. There's nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. Okay, so the first thing he says is, despite all of these things that make us despair, you were actually made to enjoy food, to enjoy drink, to find enjoyment in all your work. The point is, you were actually made to enjoy life. God didn't make you to be miserable. God loves to satisfy his creatures. But the reason you're going to miss this is because you miss his other point. This I saw, this eating, drinking, and finding enjoyment, this is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? The point is, you're not going to find the answers apart from your Creator. And as long as you try to build that sort of world, build that sort of life, it's going to fail in the end. You were made to receive life not as an end to itself, but as a gift from God, from the hand of God. Let me quote. This is a pastor that I love to read is Brian Borgman. Let me read from him real quickly. Get to the end of the chapter here. Yeah, Borgman says, if you want to ruin fatherhood, and he's using fatherhood as an example, but if you want to ruin life in general, if you want to ruin fatherhood and life, then you look at your kids as rewards earned and achievements gained, and you try to hold on to them as hard as you can for as long as you can. You can replace kids with anything that you're living for. You treat life as the work of your hands, which you've built, because you don't need God. You've built this life for yourself, and you try to hold on to it as hard as you can for as long as you can. He says you'll ruin yourself. But if you really want to enjoy them, revel, bask in the fact that they are the gift of God to you. And in Him, you can enjoy them in the fleeting moments that you have with them. And there doesn't have to be one vain moment. The point is, you weren't put here to save the world. You weren't put here to purposelessly go through life trying to save humanity. You can't do it. You cannot overcome the curse. You're not going to build a better world. What you were meant to do is receive these days from the hand of God themselves, that you might drink, eat, and enjoy the creation that God gave us, despite Adam squandering it. You were made to know your Creator, and apart from Him, you will never truly understand the value of a good steak, the gift of family, the pleasure of work, of sex, of music, and all these things. Because apart from God, all you are going to experience is those things slowly dripping away from you. You can't hold on to them. They are wind going through a net. You were made to see through them to your Creator as the source of all good things. And so as Lewis says so well, the settled happiness and security which we all desire, God withholds from us by the very nature of the world. Let me get this, see if I can get this title out of the way so you can see what I'm reading here. I'm on, okay, hang on. If I get rid of that, does not get rid of it. Oh wait, let me do this one more time. There we go. Okay, still learning the software. Okay, I'm reading this C.S. Lewis quote here to you. He says, the settled happiness and security which we all desire, God withholds us by the very nature of the world. So he's saying what humanity's after, the fullness, the concrete foundation that we want to live for, God withholds from us by the very nature of the world. The security we crave would teach us to rest our hearts in this world, and then it would become an obstacle to our return to God. A few moments of happy love, a landscape, a symphony, a merry meeting with our friends, a bath or a football match have no such tendency. Lewis says, our Father refreshes us on the journey with some pleasant ends, but will not encourage us to mistake them for home. And that's what the secularist has done. He's taken the ends of this life, the pleasures, sciences, progress, all of these things, and he has mistaken them for home, thinking that he, with his own intelligence, can build a better world, not recognizing that God has removed the ability of this created world to satisfy, that we would never mistake it for home. And that's why, what did Jesus teach us? He said, don't store up treasures for yourself that moth and rust can destroy. Why does he tell you that? Because Jesus actually cares that you would have the most rewarding, fulfilling, joy-filled life. but it's not found in the things that man can make. It's found in knowing your Creator. And so Jesus invites us to store up treasure in heaven that will live forever. Namely, turn to Christ and know your Creator, because otherwise you will find that all of life is vanity. And maybe the reason you can do this, 1 Corinthians 15, Paul says the sting of death is sin. Right? Death is a reminder of what sin has done. The power of sin is the law. But thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. Therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain. In other words, the life outside of Eden is impossible, as I write here, for us to grasp. It's not going to make any sense apart from knowing your Creator. So don't deceive yourself. Look at these 5 reasons that the preacher gives and let them sober you up. One day you're going to have to answer to death. You're going to be forgotten. You're going to have to hand your stuff over. Your work is going to kill you. And lastly, if you do not know God, everything that you've contributed is going to serve His purposes, not yours. And we tell you this, that today you would look and see Christ rose from the grave, that you would turn to your Creator. And only then will you find this life that the preacher's talking about. Why would Jesus be the Creator? Because He is. You're going to have to be more specific with that question. So have you ever thought that it's a blessing from God that we were born and we live and we die and we don't have to spend eternity here without Him, if we be found in Him? Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that's what the psalmist says in Psalm 73, right? He says, whom have I in heaven but you, and what on earth do I desire besides you? Says something along those lines. Let's see. Whom have I in heaven but you, and there's nothing on earth that I desire beside you. My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart, my portion forever. And I love that. Humanity has a strength greater than our own heart, such that when the heart fails, there is something stronger, namely God, who holds on to us. That's all I have from chapter 2. We'll look at chapter 3 next week. Christianity is not the only religion out there. It's not Christianity versus atheism. Thanks, Adam. We're aware, but in this discussion, I'm engaging atheism. So you're certainly right that there are other views that we could engage. However, the nature of Ecclesiastes is that it's dealing with an early Greek skepticism that I think has a lot of assumptions that parallel what we see in today's skepticism. So you're absolutely right. There's so many more things that we could engage. However, you've jumped into a chat that is engaging Christianity versus atheism. So, but that's all we have. We will continue next week, next Tuesday, chapter 3, which is many of you know it, the famous poem of time, right? There's a time for this, time for that. And I hope that you'll find that poem is actually far more depressing than we're used to. But in the end, I think we'll be encouraged by it. So I look forward to joining you all then. Thanks for being with us this evening.